Сайн байцгаана уу хүнд үзэгчдээ. Өнөөдөр манай de facto нэвтрүүлгийн зочноор Австралийн Гриффитийн их сургуулийн Тогтвортой үйлдвэрлэлийн төвийн дэд захирал, судлаач, доктор ноён Тапан Саркер оролцож байна.
Доктор Тапан Саркер Гриффитийн их сургуулийн Тогтвортой үйлдвэрлэлийн төвийн дэд захирал. Австралийн Үндэсний их сургуульд докторийн зэрэгийг хамгаалсан ба Гриффитийн их сургуулийн олон улсын бизнес болон Аз төв судлалын факультетийн ахлах багшаар ажилладаг. Тэрээр олон улсын иргэний нийгмийн болон төрийн байгууллага, их сургууль, үйлдвэрлэл зэрэг олон салбарт судалгаа, зөвлөх үйлчилгээ үзүүлэх багшлах чиглэлээр 20 жил ажилласан туршлагатай. Өмнө нь Дэлхийн банк, Rio Tinto, Австралийн ашигт малтамлын зөвлөл гэх мэт томоохон байгууллагуудын төслүүд дээр ажиллаж байжээ.
Good evening.
Good evening.
You have a very interesting topic to share in Mongolia, and please tell us about the lecture you made about democracy and development.
Well, thank you firstly, de facto, for inviting me. It's a great opportunity to visit Mongolia. That's my first visit in Mongolia, fascinating country. I'm really finding it very interesting. The project that brought me to Mongolia this time is through a partnership with IREM, which is Independent Research Institute of Mongolia, and that's a project aiming at promoting effective mining sector governance through capacity building in areas of research and engagement. And it is funded through the Australian government's Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. As we all know, and you will imagine that capacity building is a very important part and component now for Mongolia. It's very important now as Mongolia is transitioning from, purely from one kind of economy to a bit of mining dependent and already a mining dependent one. So there are a lot of challenges a country like Mongolia is facing currently. So this capacity building program is going to just help to some extent through our funding from the Australian government.
Capacity building at which level?
We do this one through mainly in research in governance area, in mining. The issues such as the broader aspect like sustainable development in mining. As you all know that mining always can have both positive and negative impacts. And coming from my Australian experience, we have seen the same and also other countries globally. If it goes well, it's fine, good experience, but in many of the cases, we have seen that the experience is not good at all. Ultimately, it can cause serious social instability, serious socio-political instability, and countries became so dependent on a particular sector, which is also currently the case in Mongolia, and we are examining that how Mongolia can stabilize, for instance, the macroeconomic stability issues, other issues like gender issues, and maybe other problems that to make Mongolia a bit more resilient.
Please tell us about this university sustainable business center. What do you do? Which area do you make research? Which countries, please?
My research takes me to a lot of countries. I have projects in Laos looking at water governance project with Ministry of Water Resources in Laos. I have projects in Indonesia. So our institute has a focus particularly on Asia, emerging Asia, developing Asia is our key focus. India is also one of our key partner at this moment, and finally I have to say Mongolia. This is my third project in Mongolia and first visit. So Mongolia is at the very center of my own research.
What kind of research you made before?
Macroeconomic issues is the key issue for me. Governance and sustainable development in mining, perhaps other issues that I'm really looking at. But of course through partnership with National University of Mongolia and agencies like IREM here.
Let's talk about macroeconomics of a country, Mongolia, which dependent a lot on national the natural resources. And natural resources is, as you know, 80% of our export, 20% of budget revenue. We completely dependent on that. And because we are dependent on these resources, in particular the commodities, coal, copper, price, right? And as you see, you study already in Mongolia, our governance is not that good at the even country level and the local level. And now we keep talking about, for a long time, this National Sovereign Wealth Fund, which is not yet done, and yet we're so much dependent on this fluctuation of prices. If we had this fund, it could be better. So in that terms, how do you see what we can improve in our macroeconomics?
I think from the policy perspective, there can be a lot more the government can do in collaboration with other stakeholders, perhaps with non-government agencies, including media. They play a very important role these days, civil society organizations, youth groups, women, of course business should be part of that because and international organizations as well. But can I tell you that there is also there is also some good stories to tell about Mongolia. So we can be a bit optimistic looking at some of the facts and figures we have in Mongolia if we compare with the global economy and other countries. But of course we have issues like in Mongolia that about 21% is people here below in poverty line, and many of the people, like about 3%, is probably below, getting $1 or $2 per day.
Yep.
And also child mortality is quite high too, compared to many other countries. So these are the human indicators that we need to human development indicators. We have to make sure that the policy perspective be more inclusive. So we should perhaps like a development in Mongolia that is more inclusive to all of these issues, more longer term rather than looking at the short-termism or looking at only the short-term fix, but rather a bit of more longer term view.
Yet the government in this country, because it's democratic government unlike our neighbors, and we keep changing. They are not giving even a full 4 years to many of them, and on the average we have government total 19 or so change it, but total we have 18 months. So in that terms, how these people can be long term?
Look, de facto, this is not a problem here in Mongolia alone. We know recent time in Japan alone that how many prime ministers had a democracy there. In Korea too, is a neighboring country.
And because they, even in spite of this frequent, even more than in Mongolia, changes, this government the economy is doing well because the economic and political institutions are strong, right? Which is not here the case. The reason, not only the government has changed, when the government is changed, these institutions, staff, people are changed. How can it stop?
Well, a lot of engagement needed at this moment, and I always have to say this, yes, this is not very uncommon to many of the transitioning democracies, and we have to be cautiously optimistic about Mongolia that how this transition can happen. We have to remember that Mongolia is in a transition after so many years of the other regimes, but this is a transition and that we'll have to take into consideration. I think some improvements are there too, and one important way to make further progress is to engage and have open dialogue with various stakeholders. Government should be open to talk to everybody, and of course the society and broader society too. But I am with you. Changes in government nowadays are very frequent as expected in the past.
Well, I try to be cautiously optimistic as you suggested, watch, but yet the frequent change of our political institutions. I met Dr. Robinson, who wrote the Why Nations Fail, right? Why Nations Fall, the book. And he was exactly bringing the issue of institutional capacity. So how can we make sure that for long run it is done? What do you think? What is the initial steps we should make?
Well, I'm coming back to your initial point that a sovereign wealth fund, which Norway, like a country, has a fantastic one that's for a future fund. Australia too had a similar fund in the past. This is important, especially in your booming years. You really accumulate more for the future, because we need to have intergenerational funding. That how this equity throughout the generations can be maintained, because you cannot expect this windfall forever, and mining is such an issue. But how this can be done is just to transform one sort of capital, which is now the through this mineral resources and the capital coming into translating and transforming into another form of capital in Mongolia through diversifying the economy, like at giving pure attention to small and medium enterprises, giving more opportunities for services sector opportunities, including real estate. I know real estate is quite booming here too. Perhaps is more diversifying and looking at that what other avenues
That's
we have.
what we're trying to do. But however, when they're diversifying the economy, well, there are certain comparative advantages of the country with the animal husbandry, tourism, etc. But the way we do it, I find, for example, we need free competition, free competition. Without just subsidizing one or two companies, it doesn't work. How do you see that?
I see this.
You know what I mean.
Of course. As you all know that these countries also receive plenty of foreign investments, and there should be a free flow of investments. So from the regulatory perspective, those investing here, they like to see that more favorite environment for the foreign investors. But we do have clearly a theory called resource nationalism, that many of proponents, they think that to get more benefit out of the resources, we do need our own capacity to manage these resources by ourselves. But in both areas there are some good stories and bad stories, both in natural resources and FDI scenario. So I think there should be a bit of balance or a bit of balancing act, that how and what is the good for the Mongolian people and the Mongolian society, not the others. So I think the policies should be mainly for the Mongolia, by the Mongolia, and of the Mongolia, rather say that what is good here. And that is why the engagement is needed, and to make it more inclusive.
We talked about the competition, which is important for diversifying the economy in particular, because at the end, not the state, it is the private sector diversifying economy. Agree?
Agree.
Agree. With that, for example, basic conditions like price. Price is controlled here. Through different mechanisms, they either for food, for example, they raise or decrease the excise taxes, for example. Should the government control the price?
It is a question not just in Mongolia, everywhere, and we see that government, what is the main driver for government to being re-elected again, right? And they try to take some policy which we call populist policies. Tax is one of the area. It's not just in case in Mongolia, but everywhere in the world, that increasing taxes is always a challenge for any government. But we have to understand the fact that if we want to increase the spending, there is couple of options. One is to increase taxes, otherwise to increase the debt. Now, what options we should have? Mongolia at this moment, I can see the debt is increasing, and it is the scenario for many countries because they cannot really increase the tax revenue as expected. So we basically, the diversifying the economy, expanding the tax base can provide some leverage for any government, including Mongolia, to really expand its revenue base to finance some of the other projects, and that's probably what Mongolia should do. But I would have to say that there should be some coordinated policies in Mongolia at this moment, which should be basically looking at some long-term goals and plans, and I am aware of that what's happening, the 2030 Plan Mongolia have sustainable development framework, I should say. And of course, Mongolia is also looking at the sustainable development goals, also one of the key for its development agenda.
We have a kind of almost dream list of that. I saw it, and I saw the list that of dream we want to make by 2030. But I'm worried about who is measuring and how now. And even if they are measuring, then who is making proper evaluation so that either they are reaching or not reaching the next target. And my worry in this economy is states still control the price, try to control, and with the controlled price you cannot have competition. And without competition you cannot diversify. And without diversification you are still dependent on this commodities, which price depend even on China completely. So we are kind of in this vicious circle. Where to go out, how to go out.
This is a vicious cycle, and not just Mongolia, as many countries. Market should be the key determinant forces to do, but that's not always the case. Many countries, they also intervene the pricing process, as we can know, even in this free market economy. But I think if slow progress needs to be done, not a quick one, so that the country can make some transition towards this free market economy, because we have seen some really bad examples of purely transitioning to a free market economy can lead to some serious issues, including some social and political stability and instability issues in many parts, particularly in the other economies that it happened. What I perhaps want to say probably on emphasis is that as a country, Mongolia has opportunities, but it also needs to develop its own capacity. I think capacity building, and that is the key focus of Australian governments and through our project, is that to build the capacity in Mongolia so that they can really capitalize this opportunity in
on
the future.
Capacity for governance, or capacity for what kind of capacity you talk about? There
should be capacity in issues of the technical aspects of managing things. Like I was talking to another agency like at Amnesty International today, like in issues of mapping out the mining resources, that's really some information-based thing. But at the same time, the social and governance stuff as well. So both issues of purely technical things and also the management and governance things. But at the same time, we need to understand the fact that Mongolia is a place which is quite vulnerable to the climate change issues. It's quite important now, and especially since the Paris Protocol. And I have to ask you whether Mongolia is already probably a signatory of that protocol.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. So you see that you have to make some progress gradually to significantly reduce emission. Yes. And I can imagine visiting Ulaanbaatar for last couple of days that pollution is a very, very important issue. Urban development and unplanned urban development is a critical issue. Water management and supply is a critical issue. Traffic is a serious issue. So many things. And our development progress should be integrated to all of these issues, not just sidelined or, to a particular focus on, say, mining and development. That everything should be integrated into this policy.
Understand. Integrated. That's ideally it would be fantastic. But unfortunately, it is not happening much, though there are a lot of talks. And I want to see that the intrinsic driver, with or without government, that is moving towards these directions. And you see, government is not necessarily attracting the best talents, the best graduate students. Plus, even they attract them. The whole country, the government, they keep changing with every change of cabinet. They keep wiping out these people, just learning that experiences. What to do in this capacity? Why? How can we stop it? Of course, it's a strength of administration, but
as long as the capacity remains and retains in Mongolia, that's good. But I understand retention of employees is very important because you need a bit of continuity and capitalizing that experience in a particular sector. So far I have studied that many policies and laws are quite good here and adopted from many of the other countries. But I think from the implementation side, that's the main weakness. And to improve further into this area of implementation, what we need is the capacity there and a bit of consistency in whether in the human capital retention as well, to manage this. Incentives is one of the key. Government have to incentivize these people working in various sector. But again, that needs the public finance pressure because they need to pay and increase these things.
So again, this vicious circle
that's
is happening. Let's then, well, we talk about revenue that unfortunately or fortunately coming so far because there's no other sources from mining now, right? And Australia, you said Australia had before that kind of intergenerational fund. What happened to it? When they have stopped and why?
Well, they have utilized this fund for many other income, long-term plans, and so they reinvested that fund into other funds.
Plus economy, the more economy was diversified.
Yes.
Now, which percent of the Australia export is mining?
Currently, it is very little at this moment. It is more about the primary industry in general is quite small now at this moment. So the economy is more diversified and is skewed to the services sector, the banking, financials, even our tourism sector and education sector is there.
Education export is so high.
So
yes.
Very high, and that's why probably I had a chat yesterday. So tourism too could be an important sector in Mongolia, like the cultural tourism.
For that we need privatize or we need to make more liberalized the air transportations, which is going very reluctantly here because the state still wants to have own airlines.
Okay.
Was Kansas state before?
Which one?
Kansas Airlines, Australian.
Qantas is not.
Qantas
we have sort of deregulated, and it is private organization now.
But initially was it?
Initially it was.
Yeah,
Commonwealth Bank it was.
How long it was, if you
remember?
Many
years.
And it was state-owned.
It is state-owned. Many of our big companies were state-owned.
Yes.
But then it was privatized, and
through again shares.
Yeah, that's right. They are stock exchange. They are still in the Australian stock exchange listed there. So it's more privatization, as you have seen throughout the world happen, and most of the enterprises in Australia became more privatized.
Which years it happened?
I don't exactly remember, but it is now purely a private company
headed
by Alan Joyce, British.
Tourism is something that can be developed in this country, but the bottleneck is air transportation and the huge, we call it huge guard, sitting but not doing the job is our airlines. Not because the people are bad, they are professionals, good professional people, but too much state interference. They will tell them where to fly, who will be their CEO, or who will be the board member, and a monopoly. So they not talk about the efficiency, and I think this sort of, you see, the huge reforms we need. So what you would recommend Mongolian government first to do?
Well, policy reform is an ongoing process, and dialogue is one of the key aspect of this reform. I would say that should have some forward-looking policies, not to stuck into a conundrum which is to be staying as it is, but rather making slow but steady progress. Steady progress is more important than rapid progress because that's not sustainable. To gradually opening up, but also balancing this too, that how to do this. And for Mongolia, unlike Australia, we are surrounded by water. This is fully surrounded by land. We have a lot of other problems because air travel is the only option here. Otherwise, you have to either access through China or through Russia. So this is a challenging sort of demography here, the challenging geography as well, and that makes things more difficult. for Mongolia to attract tourists, to make things more diverse. And that's why own resource mobilization within Mongolia is probably the best option that what we have.
Own resources.
Yeah,
yes.
own resources mobilization, like utilizing the own resources. Because very often we see that when the development things happen, we ignore the power of small and medium enterprises of a country.
Yes.
And we have looked at the cases.
Exactly.
Now I am studying the Indonesian case. There is huge impact that can have in the both forward and backward linkages. And there is competitive advantage of the society. You don't need to bring a lot.
You're
Those
saying
people
not
can-
only look at the for investment, for money, but look at your own resources.
Exactly.
The energy of your own people, right? Direct it in the way that they will create.
That's right. And so that will create a society which is more inclusive. Our unemployment rate will fall, poverty rate will fall
That
too.
will happen only when the government is not corrupt, when government is far from corruption, the decision makers are from the businesses themselves, which unfortunately not the case in this country.
These issues of corruption, and we know that the corruption issues and issues like Transparency International Index,
Yes.
many of these countries, and even I come from a similar country.
Which
corruption,
country are you from?
I'm originally from Bangladesh.
Bangladesh,
Yeah. So if you see the list, we all know it is,
Yeah,
it
it's
is
quite,
clearly in
yes.
the public that many countries are facing the issues of corruption and issues, and they're
Now you are
I'm in Australia
Australian
now.
citizen.
Australian citizen and working
Why
there.
you left your country?
Well, it is that I'm working now everywhere now. So based in Australia and in Brisbane. So I can work.
What I'm trying to ask you question is, what happens to a country like Bangladesh or Mongolia, where the brightest mind is leaving becoming citizens of Australia or England or America? What do you think this trend? If everybody will move that, well, it is not a personal issue.
No,
but,
that's not a good trend. I should say I don't support this trend either. But I would say that it is probably my short-term move. But of course, I plan to go back once I accumulate more knowledge to go and help my country. But I'm really working and helping in many of the areas in my country through my research and expertise.
a good connection back.
Good connection back. Thanks.
All right. Now, we're in Australia. In Mongolia, you're working between two countries, not only with Mongolia, other countries. Are you optimistic about this Mongolia?
I'm cautiously optimistic. As I have to say, as I'm a political economist, I look at things in a more macro policy perspective, looking at issues not just in Mongolia, but also comparative policy and
Okay.
politics as well throughout the region. Mongolia is part of this region. Mongolia is also an independent country, making progress, making transition. There are many good things, but there are many challenges in Mongolia.
Okay, sure.
So I think
Tapan.
gradually it is something that Mongolia can make, but there are a long and hard pathway ahead, like many other countries, and Mongolia is no exception. But I can see some really good days ahead of Mongolia. I think Mongolia's good days are ahead of Mongolia.
Well, you made me cautiously optimistic.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. In fact, it's really great to meet you.
Thank you. Хүн үзэгчдээ манай нэвтрүүлгээр өнөөдөр Австралийн Гриффитийн их сургууль Тогтвортой үйлдвэрлэлийн төв гэж байдаг. Энэ төвийн одоо орлогч захирал Монгол төсөл хийж байгаа доктор Тапан Саркер оролцлоо. Баярлалаа.